Okay, hello everyone. My name is Kai He. I'm the director of the CGPP, the Center for Governance and Public Policy at the Griffith University in Brisbane, Australia. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land on which I'm standing now and pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Welcome everyone to today's roundtable, co-sponsored by CGPP and the Global Research Network on Peaceful Change. Please note we are going to recording today's event so that we can share it on the web later. So today we are going to discuss a very important and exciting book, Oxford Handbook on Peaceful Change in International Relations. It is a big and a significant book, and you can see it. It's a very heavy one. It is our great honor and pleasure to invite two editors of the book, Professor Dewi Paul and Professor Deborah Larson, as well as one contributor of the book, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar, to join today's roundtable discussion. In addition, Professor Andrew O'Neill, our own leading IR expert at Griffith, will serve as a discussant to offer some comments. To be honest, I don't think our four distinguished speakers need any types of introduction because you must have known their academic and policy works. Still, let me very briefly introduce them according to the order of their presentation. First, Professor Dewi Paul is James McGill Professor of International Relations at McGill University, Montreal, Canada, and a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada. He served as the President of International Studies Association for 2016 to 2017. He's the founding director of the Global Research Network on Peaceful Change. More importantly, he's now a adjunct professor at the CGPP. Our second speaker is Professor Deborah Larson, Professor of Political Science at the University of California, Los Angeles. She has a very long list of significant publications, which I don't think I have time to mention all of them today, but I would like to highlight two of them. One is called The Origins of Containment, a Psychological Explanation, published by Princeton University Press. It is a classic in political psychology. Her most recent co-authored book is entitled Quest for Status, Chinese and Russian Foreign Policy, published by Yale University Press in 2019. Our third speaker is Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. She is a member of Indonesian Academy of Science, a research professor of Research Center for Politics at the National Research and Innovation Agency, and the chairman of the board of directors of the Habibie Center based in Jakarta. In 2010-2017, Dewi served as a deputy secretary to the vice president of the Republic of Indonesia. She has written widely on Indonesian foreign policy and ASEAN. Last but not least, Professor Andrew O'Neill is a professor of political science and the acting dean of the Griffith Graduate Research School. He previously served as a dean for research in the Griffith Business School, head of School of Government and International Relations, and the director of the Griffith Asia Institute. In 2020, Andrew was appointed as a member of Australian Research Council's College of Experts. For today's roundtable, each speaker will have up to 50 minutes for presentation. Then we will have a short exchange among our four speakers and later a Q&A at the end. For audience, please mute your microphone and hold your questions until the Q&A session. So without further ado, let's invite our first speaker, Professor Dewi Paul. Dewi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kai, organizing this event and also contributing really a great chapter on China in this handbook, which he just showed you. And we are really honored to have three of the contributors, actually four contributors, including myself and two co-editors on this important roundtable that Kai is organizing. Now, as Kai said, this handbook is the first and most important publication since we formed this global network on peaceful change at the ISA conference in Toronto in 2019. At that time, we were talking to various people and realized that there is a lot of work out there on this subject matter, and it was important to produce something that will somehow bring together this wide set of literature. And so we talked to the OUP editor in charge of handbooks, and she was very excited about it. We were thrilled to get a contract very soon. But then we were planning to organize a conference in Hawaii at the ISA that had to be canceled. Still, within 2 years, thanks to the extremely important contributions of the contributors and my co-editors, we produced this handbook. And still, some people are not yet received it, but I think in Europe and many other parts of the world, they have already arrived, but it is slow thanks to the globalization bottlenecks that we are witnessing today. So this network is basically a loose network we have about 10 universities now. Over time, our hope is to build it up, do more work. But impressively, Kai and colleagues there are indeed Huyen Feng working on various projects in Singapore. Another group of scholars at RSIS. In fact, I'm going to do another launch after half an hour after this. And then in Europe, Copenhagen and Vienna, we also produced a major double issue of International Affairs recently on projects making, and our needed as the world is entering another round of, potentially another round of power transition conflict. And so there is a gap in our understanding of change, as we know in IR, in particular, change that is peaceful. Now, we are not claiming all peaceful changes are for good. Some can lead to extremely bad outcomes. As we know, some democratic elections don't necessarily produce the best outcome, but election was probably peaceful. So our aim is to look at it from both sides, but at the same time, the topic was big in the 1930s, as we know. E.H. Carr and others talked about the subject. There was the global gathering of the First International Studies grouping. And then it somehow lost its importance during the Cold War, although we have some discussion of efforts during the Cold War. And then the end of the Cold War happened without a big violent incident, peacefully. So there was an upsurge of interest in Gorbachev's policies and what led to that transformation. And then the policies of Russia and China in particular, peaceful rise, gave some more fillip to this understanding of peaceful change. So we need to see this troubled legacy of the study of peaceful change. It was associated with appeasement. And then historically, it has been neglected because of the dominance of realist paradigm. And of course, liberalism and constructivism have quite a bit to contribute to the subject of peaceful change. But to our understanding, they haven't put it together as a coherent research program yet. There are definitely great works going on various meanings. So my introductory paper is what I am talking a little bit about. And this is a definition I use, varying along a continuum, minimalist understanding, change in international relations and foreign policies of states, including territorial or sovereignty agreements that takes place without violence. So that's a minimalist. And you have a maximalist understanding, refers to transformational change that takes place non-violently at the global, regional, interstate, societal levels, leading to deep peace and higher levels of prosperity and justice for all. That's an extreme way of change, world order sort of understanding. Of course, there are in-between categories. And then we also want to look at the systemic, regional, subsystemic type of changes. System change, as Gilpin talks about, alteration in the fundamental actors, empire to states. Very rarely it happens. Then you have systemic change. I'm using Gilpin's ideas, change within a system rather than of the system, and where you have power transition can take place with sometimes violence, sometimes without violence. A regional change, of course, is if the regional orders change without violence, then we are looking at it as a peaceful change. So the chapter then goes on to interwar period debate from the 1919 Paris Peace Conference to 1939, the big debate between those who thought peaceful change was achievable, those who thought it wasn't achievable. And there's a lot of resonance to today's world, which is what is most interesting. Some of that arguments that were made, you can translate that, of course, not entirely, but some of the ideas are relevant in the US-China context to a great extent. So you have these ideas, considerable number of thinking going on in Europe, but then got sidetracked. Now today, we have a considerable amount of understanding why certain changes are taking place the way they do. The onset of globalization in particular, the rise of institutions, and of course, the gradual changing of the policies of both Russia and China with respect to change and grand strategy. And why that happened, this is something that we should definitely explore. Why do states change their grand strategies from so-called peaceful rise to not so peaceful approaches? Is it something to do with the fact that reciprocity and their expectations did not fulfill the way they thought international order will evolve? So that is the post-Cold War period. The book, the chapter then goes into realist understanding of change, this adamant understanding of cyclical perspectives and linear change, to some extent, balance of power, deterrence-based order building as opposed to any major change. I think there is a big disjunction between what's happening in the world and often this sort of occasional intense heart balancing process taking place. Of course, I'm not denying it does happen. So there are quite a bit of challenges to that sort of paradigms there. Liberalism, of course, has been most focused on change and peaceful change in particular. And the Kantian tripod, institutions, economic interdependence, democratic orders, all are supposed to contribute. But the problem is many parts of the world don't have these three instruments. So what do we do there? Constructivism, of course, social learning, socialization, norms, identities, pluralistic security community. All, you notice both liberalism and constructivism are so built around Western liberal notions. And that is a challenge because other approaches, civilizational approaches, for instance, talk about peace, peaceful change. That's one thing in this book. We have chapters on civilizational approaches as well, and regional approaches. And then we go into beyond paradigms, incremental revolutionary change, trying to understand some critical theories as well, factors that really are not useful for change in terms of, or the feasibility of change. We discuss sources and mechanisms, international law, international institutions, technology, nuclear deterrence, climate change, political economy, sources, democracy, social movements, many of the mechanisms that we included in chapters. But then a set of papers, chapters on great powers and rising powers as major agents of change, often violent change in the past. And they contributed, great powers contributed both peaceful and not so peaceful change. As we know, many times they do contribute, but for some reason, we haven't paid attention to their violent contributions and peaceful change contributions sufficiently. Chapters on US, Russia, and I think Debbie Larson is going to talk about the US, China, And other pivotal states like Germany, Japan, India, Indonesia, where our Dewi is going to talk about, South Africa, peaceful coexistence, great ideas that these regional states have contributed. And why great powers abandon peaceful grand strategies is a topic that perhaps I'm actually hoping to work on a book on that subject. But then we discussed the regional transformations. Many regions have contributed immensely to change. The European experience, ASEAN, partial success, Africa, South America. But then why some regions are mired in conflict and not able to bring about peaceful change? South Asia and Middle East, for instance. And so there are 7 substantive parts, 41 chapters altogether. Historical origins, 3 chapters. Theoretical traditions, 10 chapters. Key material and ideational sources, 8 chapters. Pivotal states that made contributions, some 8 chapters. And some 10 chapters on different regions in the world that made contributions. Let me conclude by saying we need a new research agenda. The IR paradigms haven't paid enough attention, at least from our point of view. We perhaps need eclectic approaches. Future inquiry should look into structural conditions, likely candidates, relationship between peace and systemic change, domestic politics and international level change, the emerging technologies and change, cyberspace in particular, the role of social movement, state capacity, and of course, how to study this. The methodology is very important. The mechanisms, the markers. Can we develop interdisciplinary approaches? Because other disciplines like sociology have a lot to contribute. In fact, peaceful change in domestic society is a big part of sociology, as far as I know, and why peaceful change is followed by violence. So let me stop there. I know I took a little extra time, but thank you so much for listening to us, and let's hope we can have a meaningful conversation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And our second speaker, Professor Deborah Larson.
Thank you.
Please.
I do have a PowerPoint presentation. Let's see if I can get it. It says host disabled, participant screen sharing.
Really?
Let me try again. Okay.
You have to share the screen, Kai.
Yeah.
Okay. How about right now? Can you share the screen?
Okay, let me try.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah.
So here is the cover of our volume. So to review, what is peaceful change? As TV mentioned, there's different definitions. Peaceful change can range from simply the absence of violence to a deep peace with social justice. But in the volume, most of us used a more limited definition as resolution of social problems mutually by institutionalized processes without resort to large-scale physical force. And that definition comes from Karl Deutsch in 1957. Notice that we refer to social problems, mutual solutions, and institutions. So we emphasize institutions. So in the volume, the authors are concerned with the sources, the mechanisms, and the causes of peaceful change. And as TV mentioned, peaceful change was neglected during the Cold War. It was viewed as synonymous with appeasement of a revisionist power like Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union. But despite the scholarly neglect, there were examples of peaceful change during the Cold War, such as the emergence of the United Nations, the European Union, détente between the superpowers, Ostpolitik, and finally, peaceful reunification of Germany. So why has peaceful change recently come to the fore? Well, one reason is the rise of China and new global problems that require cooperation, such as climate change and pandemics. So to explain peaceful change, we move to the leading IR theories. Realism doesn't view peaceful change as probable or even possible. Power transitions from one power to the other are usually accompanied by competition and war. Realists view history as cyclical. It's merely a continuing recurrence of balances of power. Liberalism has a more optimistic assessment of prospects for peaceful change. Liberalism has a progressive view of history and a view of harmony of interest among states. According to liberalism, there are three major mechanisms or three major causes of peaceful change: liberal democracy, economic interdependence, and international institutions. Constructivism is also fairly optimistic about the possibility of peaceful change, but it derives from social learning, socialization, and the adoption of new norms, perhaps by means of naming and shaming. So in my talk today, I'm going to summarize my chapter on the United States' contribution to peaceful change. And then I'm going to review some of the conclusions of the handbook based on all the essays and highlight an agenda for future research. So in my chapter, I argue that the United States contributed to peaceful change by acting as a liberal hegemon. And both those elements are important. The United States used its power to promote liberal principles of peaceful change. And we can see this in the Anglo-American power transition, Woodrow Wilson's theory of peaceful change, and the post-World War II peace settlement. The Anglo-American leadership transition at the turn of the century, from the 19th century to the 20th century, is one of the few peaceful power transitions in history. Britain started out as the leading power in North America at the beginning of the 19th century. But by 1904, the United States was dominant, and the United States obtained its preeminent position through a series of border crises. In these crises, the United States used coercion, but Britain appeased the United States. In 1823, President James Monroe announced that the North American hemisphere was closed to further colonization. As we know, the famous Monroe Doctrine. Now, we don't usually think of the Monroe Doctrine as peaceful change, but it did protect the Latin American countries from being caught up in intra-European power struggles. So this was an example of peaceful change through spheres of influence. Britain ultimately appeased the United States because it had global interest, whereas the United States was primarily concerned with North America, and therefore the US was more highly motivated. Britain appeased the United States, and the result was peaceful change, one of the few peaceful power transitions in history. Woodrow Wilson synthesized liberal principles of peaceful change, such as self-determination, free trade, and the League of Nations. The Wilsonian ideology became the dominant American approach to peaceful change, and still is today. FDR laid the groundwork for the liberal international order. The post-World War II peace settlement is the most successful example of the American approach to peaceful change, which includes multilateral institutions to regulate economic transactions and to resolve conflict. So there were multilateral institutions to manage the economy, and the United Nations Security Council to prevent wars or to stop wars after they occurred. But the liberal peace settlement of FDR had substantial realist elements, namely the permanent members of the UN Security Council were based on FDR's concept of the four policemen: the US, Britain, Russia, and China. And each one of the four policemen was to have a sphere of influence. But after great power cooperation broke down, President Truman enacted the Marshall Plan and NATO. The Marshall Plan required that European states cooperate in using US economic assistance. It laid the basis for the European Union. And the European Union helped create trust, especially between France and West Germany, that disputes would not be resolved by war. And NATO allowed European states to focus on economic development and trade without having to worry about their security. So that's the US approach to peaceful change. The United States used its power to promote liberal principles of peaceful change. But in the volume as a whole, we find that liberal theory does not always work well. Democracy does not appear to be necessary for peaceful change. For example, China is a non-liberal power, but it established the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which have the potential to contribute to peaceful change. Liberal interventions to promote democracy instead led to instability and war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. Of the triangle of the liberal approach to peaceful change, economic interdependence and institutions appear to be more important contributors. Another takeaway from the volume is that the sources and mechanisms of peaceful change differ by time and place. Democracy is not always conducive to peaceful change when there are ethnic divisions, as in the Middle East or South Asia. Economic interdependence and institutions help contribute to peaceful change in Northeast Asia, but not South Asia or Latin America. So what is the research agenda? Well, areas of research include issues, the agents of change, and the nature of peaceful change. The issues include the perennial problem of how to accommodate rising powers into the international system, how to accept a greater role for rising powers, such as China and India. And here you can see from the picture that China and India don't appear to be getting along too well with each other. There's also the issue of how to socialize Russia into a new major power role where it can contribute constructively instead of acting as a spoiler. The issues for peaceful change include how to persuade states to cooperate on making the transition to a carbon-free world and controlling future pandemics if we can ever get out of COVID-19. We also need more research into the role of middle and small powers as agents of change. In the volume, there is a special section on major powers, and that includes the United States, the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, Germany under Willy Brandt and Helmut Kohl and Adenauer. But we know that middle and small powers also have an important role. They can mediate between large states, and they can act as norm entrepreneurs. Another issue that TV Paul alluded to is, why has peaceful change occurred and then regressed, gone backwards? For example, globalization initially led to China's peaceful rise, but now China's using economic interdependence in some cases as a weapon of influence against other states. The EU also seems to be going backwards with Brexit and the rise of new non-liberal democracies such as Poland and Hungary. Why has this happened? Is it due to misperception or structural change? And finally, what is the difference between peace as the absence of war and peaceful change? So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Really interesting presentation. Let's go to our third speaker, Professor Dewi Fortuna Anwar. Please, Dewi.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kai, and thank you very much to TV and Kai for including me in this very important book project. So I'm really honored that I've been invited to write about Indonesia. Please excuse me, my chooks are joining in. So I've been asked to write about Indonesia's contributions to peaceful change in international affairs. In my paper, I highlight three main areas of Indonesia's contribution to peaceful change. Despite the fact that if you look at the first 2 decades of Indonesia's history, it's been full of violence and conflicts. And the transition from regime transition in Indonesia from Sukarno's guided democracy to Suharto is very bloody. But throughout that, and despite the fact also throughout the New Order period, what you might call not necessarily peaceful change, but probably developmental peace and internal repression. But Indonesia has contributed to the development of regional stability and peaceful change, the development of regional institutions. And then the period of the transition to democracy, where there have been more roles for Indonesia in contributing to peaceful change. So three areas of Indonesia's contributions. The first is promoting regional stability by from confrontation to cooperation. The second area that I highlight is that Indonesia has played a very active role as a middle power. Debbie has mentioned about the role of a middle power, and a number of areas in which Indonesia has played quite a significant role in mediating conflicts and promoting these norms and institutions. And third areas is Indonesia's promotion of moderate Islam and democracy as a new foreign policy agenda. Indonesia being the largest Muslim majority country, and lately, particularly with the rise of extremism and violence extremism and terrorism and the rise of Islamophobia, Indonesia also promoted, this what it's called moderate Islam, or Islam of the middle path. So let me first touch on this changing Indonesia's politics, from confrontation to cooperation towards its nearest neighbors in Southeast Asia. This is very much related to these ideas of changing from paradigm. The first paradigm of the Indonesian leaders, particularly Sukarno, is to complete decolonization. And throughout that period of the first 2 decades of Indonesia's independence, from 1945 to about 1965, for Sukarno, the Cold War was less of a signifier because a lot of in the Cold War, the good guys, the liberal democracy in the Cold Wars were all colonial powers. the countries that had to be fought against by countries in Asia and Africa. So for that purpose, despite the fact that Indonesia adopted a free and active foreign policy, later, a founding member of non-aligned movement, for President Sukarno, the focus of third world solidarity should be in fighting colonialism. So that means, the alignment was between the new emerging forces of newly independent states against what he called the old established forces of colonialism and imperialism. So because of this decolonization process, when Malaysia was established with the support of Britain, Sukarno at the time saw that as a hostile act against Indonesia, saw that as an attempt to perpetuate British colonial rule and presence. So Jakarta confronted Malaysia, and at home, this radical foreign policy was also because of the instability at home, because Sukarno's power structure was very unstable, because he tried to bring together the forces of Islam, communism, and anti-communism. And in order to do that, you can also argue that he needed a more adventurous foreign policy to unite the contending forces at home. So very unstable political structure at home, where the Indonesian Communist Party at the time was actually the second largest communist party after the Chinese Communist Party. At the same time, the army was the other stakeholder of power, was very, very anti-communist. And presiding over this, Sukarno carried out a very frenetic politicization at home, always agitating because he had no real base of power for himself. So his agitation, demagogy was very important in controlling the various political forces, and then directing that to confronting what he called the Necolin powers and neocolonialism and colonialism, and in the region, it meant confronting Malaysia. That power structure collapsed through violent means also. This is Sukarno, there was an abortive communist coup, and then the backlash from the army, and Sukarno was kicked out of office. But the transition from the Sukarno's rule to the Suharto's new order was very violent. It's still not very clear yet how many people were actually killed, but the end result is that the Communist Party was decimated. A lot of the communist sympathizers were either killed or in prison. So this is violent change. But the paradigm shift was that for the new order government, for the military, the enemy was no longer the colonial or imperialist powers, but the main threat was communism, particularly subversion from China. So instead of emphasizing decolonization, the focus was more on developing national resilience, in which economic development became the central driving force. National resilience was seen in a more comprehensive manner, but communism, according to the military leaders in Indonesia, could not be fought through military alliances or through military approaches, but it has to be done by removing the root causes of social and economic grievances. And for that, economic development became critical. So what happened in Indonesia is very much in line with this research about developmental peace. That happened in other countries in Asia as well. There's a body of research by Stein Tonneson about developmental peace, explaining East Asian peace, where the paradigm shift, it's also happened in China, from revolution to the pursuit of economic development. And for that, states needed both domestic stability and external stability. So that switch, Indonesia stopped confrontations with Malaysia, and to stop the distrust amongst neighboring countries and promote a more institutionalized regional cooperation, Indonesia became a co-founder of the regional cooperation, the ASEAN Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So this is very much a real game changer. And that happened because of domestic political changes in Indonesia. Because under Sukarno is not interested in pursuing regional cooperation. But under Suharto, because the focus was not regional integration at the time, the focus was to allow Indonesia to focus inward, to develop political stability at home, to develop economic development. So it needed to free itself from regional entanglements. And also at the same time, those Necolin powers, those imperialistic colonial powers, are the countries that can provide foreign aid, markets, technical assistance, and investment, and so on. So Indonesia also switched its foreign policy to become much more into a de facto alignment, in fact, with Western countries and Japan. And then, so that's really, became a core, Indonesia became an anchor of regional cooperation. And quickly, Indonesia has also played an important role as a middle power. And this audio started from the early period. Indonesia hosted the first Asian African conference in Bandung in 1955 that led to this Bandung Principles. It invited newly independent Asian and African countries. The purpose was to bring all countries with different ideological orientations or political systems, but to foster international solidarity between developing countries, but also to ensure peaceful coexistence within the Cold War, and to find a middle path for these countries. And in fact, Bandung conference was the first conference in which China was invited in. Zhou Enlai attended. And this the Bandung spirit of peaceful coexistence, in fact, informed Indonesia's foreign policy from that time onward. And the Bandung conference became, in fact, the precursor of the non-aligned movement. And throughout the history, you can also always you can see that Indonesia has always attempted this, the free and active foreign policy, a non-alignment, and trying to bring all countries together, including within the region. The Indonesia's proposal of ASEAN outlook on Indo-Pacific, for example, its insistence on a more inclusive regional architecture that brings all sides in. And then the success of ASEAN, a lot of studies have looked, why TV talk, why has regional institutions, regional organizations have not been as effective in developing peaceful change in the Middle East or South Asia. And for this, a lot of observers have noted the role of Indonesia. Indonesia is by far the largest member of ASEAN, particularly when they were still in ASEAN 5. But even now with ASEAN 10, 40% of the 600 population of Southeast Asia live in Indonesia. But Indonesia has not developed a more assertive leadership role. Indonesia is seen to be a natural leader within ASEAN, but from the very beginning, it adopted a more low-profile role within ASEAN. The Javanese concept of leading from behind, and now maybe just leading from the middle. So the concept of hegemonic peace, is not attractive to Indonesia, because this is consciousness. Indonesia is always going to be the biggest, and if Indonesia becomes too assertive, then it will bring back the memory of confrontation to neighboring countries, which would be counterproductive to regional peace and stability. So this consistent efforts to maintain regional harmony by restraining itself. This been tested over time. Over Myanmar, for example, Indonesia has become much more assertive there, but there is this still continues, the desire to ensure that ASEAN remains a cornerstone of Indonesia's foreign policy, the stress on ASEAN centrality, and so on. And then Indonesia's role as middle power has also been shown in its active role in mediating conflicts. Indonesia's role, for example, in helping to resolve the Cambodian conflict, is, where Indonesia at the time did not necessarily only follow ASEAN, but also took its own effort when the ASEAN policy was more geared towards supporting the Cambodian regime against Vietnam. Indonesia tried to bring Vietnam also together. So over the Cambodian conflict, and then the bilateral conflict between Thailand and Cambodia, the only, hopefully the last open conflict between the ASEAN member states over that border temple. Indonesia also played an active role there, and also in the peace settlement In Mindanao, Indonesia also played an active role. And also Indonesia has played a very active role in UN peacekeeping force. So since 1957, this is, Indonesia as a good international citizen has played an active role in sending troops and has an ambition to be one of the top 10 leading troop contributing countries. And in fact, it's established a center for peacekeeping force. And then lastly, since the reformasi, since the transition to democracy, we have also seen a new agenda, foreign policy agenda that Indonesia has tried to promote both within ASEAN and beyond, namely try to use and to promote Islam, moderate Islam, and also try to promote democracy. Now, for a long time, Islam has never been a major factor in Indonesia's foreign policy, despite the fact that Indonesia is a Muslim majority country, except insofar as its unstinting support for Palestinian independence. And until now, Indonesia still does not have diplomatic relations with Israel. So it's very, very pro-Palestinian. And in fact, it's been cited over and over again that Palestinian independence is the only leftover, the only country has not regained independence out of the countries that attended, the issues that were brought to the 1955 Bandung Conference. Now, with the 9/11 and the rise of violent extremism using or abusing Islam and the rise of Islamophobia, there is a feeling in Indonesia that Indonesia in the past simply looked to the Middle East, and while Islam in Southeast Asia, Indonesia is considered to be peripheral to the mainstream Islam. But since 2001, there's been a move in Indonesia to say, we need to mainstream Indonesia's Islam, which is in line also with democracy and women empowerment and modernity. So Indonesia has been very active in promoting that Islam of the middle path, and also has been very active in interfaith dialogues, both to talk to the Muslims, to say that there is choices, that you don't all have to be fundamentalists, that there are different models for Islam in today's modern world, and also as a bridge between the Islamic world and the Western world. So that has continued to be very important. Indonesia has also now established an international Islamic university in Indonesia, where it will be taught about citizenship and how to adapt into Islam to the modern world. And last but not least, also this new foreign democracy agenda. So particularly within ASEAN, for a long time, ASEAN was regarded as a more elitist, intergovernmental regional organization, not really oriented towards the people. And in fact, Indonesia has been at the forefront in trying to transform, ASEAN into a more people-oriented one, developing an ASEAN community, and introducing new values within the ASEAN community. There's a pillar called political and security community, which looks at, not just Deutsch security community of peaceful relations between states, but also that, you have to have peace within states as well. And that means that democracy and human rights have to become important. So there is a desire to align Indonesia's priorities at home in promoting democracy and human rights to bringing it to ASEAN as well. And Indonesia was a strong proponent of the ASEAN Charter by introducing these new values. And also, Indonesia has also taken an active role in promoting democracy through a more inclusive and softer approach through the Bali Democracy Forum, in which Indonesia has tried to promote dialogue, not just between established democracies, but also between those who are aspiring to democracies, in which China is also invited. So, these are some of the areas in which Indonesia have contributed, not all successfully, according to studies like Emmers and Theo. Indonesia is a normative middle power, is more successful in promoting norms, values, and so on, particularly within the region. It's not as successful as a functional middle power, really trying to change an issue. And over Myanmar, ASEAN has been spectacularly failing that. But the fact of the matter is that, the issues of democracy and human rights is now embedded in the ASEAN Charter, and the 5-point consensus in which ASEAN is trying to hold Myanmar accountable is by using the ASEAN Charter. That Myanmar has also signed on to it, so that at least we are not just talking about values that are seen to be a Western imposition. This is already seen that within the ASEAN Charter, and at home, the democratic transitions have also led to some peaceful change, peaceful settlement of the Aceh conflict. And East Timor's, although the aftermath of the plebiscite that Indonesia asked the UN to hold was violent, but under the Indonesian democracy, we now have independent East Timor with good relations to Indonesia. So those are some of the Indonesia's contribution to peaceful change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dewi. Yeah, really interesting about the Indonesians' contribution to peaceful change. And let's invite our own IR expert, Professor Andrew O'Neill, to give some comments. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kai. And I'd like to start my remarks by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking today and pay my respects to the elders past and present and to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Well, I'm delighted and I'm honoured to be asked to comment on the 3 chapters in this very important handbook that I'm sure will make a really critical contribution to the existing literature. I'd like to congratulate the speakers on 3 very engaging, what I found to be very engaging chapter contributions to the handbook. Dewi Fortuna Anwar's discussion of Indonesia's transition to democracy covers arguably the Indo-Pacific's most remarkable instance of peaceful change in the second half of the 20th century. Strangely overlooked by many students of democracy, the Indonesian transition has been incredibly successful and in many respects provides a textbook case study that many long-established democracies could well learn from, and which should concern, at least in theory, authoritarian regimes in the region. Deborah Larson skillfully maps the influence of the US as an agent of democratic change through its role as a liberal hegemonic power. While aberrations like the Trump period, well, let's face it, there's nothing like the Trump period, raised doubts about America's commitment to global leadership in the long term, Larson reminds us that, historically speaking, a desire to change the world is an impulse that courses through the veins of American foreign policy. TV Paul's chapter expertly synthesises the salient theoretical paradigms and empirical trends in relation to peaceful change. I was particularly taken with his observation that the IR discipline, of which I'm part, contains considerable weaknesses when it comes to capturing transformational change. The unfortunate reality is that IR scholarship is poor in predicting change, or for that matter, much else. The end of the Cold War, blowback against globalization, and the resurgence of authoritarianism are 3 obvious examples, but there remain many others. I'd like to make a couple of observations in my brief remarks today about one of the single biggest challenges for contemporary policymakers, and it's something that has been alluded to already in the presentations. And it's one that exercises the best minds among IR scholars, and that's China's transition to great power status and whether this can be managed peacefully. And I want to come at this issue through a couple of questions, 2 questions. The first is, will China's transition to great power status lead to war as the US seeks to push back and contain China's rise? Historically speaking, the smart money would be on a major conflict. It's indeed rare where established great powers willingly accommodate new great power challenges. Washington and Beijing have deliberately sharpened the ideological edge to their rivalry, which adds an explicitly Manichaean layer to their relationship. Most realists would predict war, but prediction, as we know, is not the strong suit of any IR theoretical paradigm. One of the very few areas of bipartisanship in Washington these days is the need for a tough approach to Beijing. This has a strong undercurrent of the US not ceding its position as the preeminent power in the world, but it also stems from a desire to punish China for rampant intellectual property theft the derogation of human rights in Hong Kong, and the genocide committed against its own Uyghur population. In Beijing, the departure from consensus decision-making in the CPC, an explicit centralization of power in Xi Jinping, and a conviction that the US and its allies are working actively to contain China's rise, I should say, have fostered a greater appetite for revanchism and an increased willingness, even eagerness, to challenge the US publicly. That said, this week's climate change initiative, co-sponsored by Beijing and Washington, has a distinctive G2 feel to it. And we know that there are other overlapping areas of mutual interest between the US and China. US allies like Japan and even Australia will be watching very closely as to whether G2ism becomes habit forming in other issue areas over the next year or two. Notwithstanding the tough talk on issues like Taiwan, neither side, that is Beijing or Washington, is keen on fighting a war. This is reinforced by the objective reality that China's nuclear second strike capability is becoming increasingly secure by the day. Mutual deterrence between Washington and Beijing seems to be robust. That said, history is littered with examples of great powers that stumbled into conflict either through inadvertent escalation or lack of foresight. Like the Cold War, a direct conflict between today's superpowers would likely result in the exchange of nuclear weapons. Worryingly, there's little evidence that Washington and Beijing have developed the mechanisms to provide the requisite de-escalatory off-ramps that can be used during crises. Beijing has resisted structured dialogue with the US over confidence-building measures, and Washington has often seemed to be more interested in placing public pressure on Beijing regarding trilateral nuclear arms control with Russia than it has been in coaxing China into bilateral nuclear confidence building. The second question that I'd like to briefly address is, does the experience of the Cold War provide any guide or at least some signposts as to whether peaceful change is possible in the transition that we're currently experiencing in the great power domain? In several respects, US-China interactions echo the dynamics of the superpower relationship between 1945 and the 1980s. The increasingly zero-sum nature of the relationship, the action-reaction cycle driving their respective military acquisitions, and the ideological overlay all replicate key patterns of the Cold War. Now, for some, these patterns might actually offer some reassurance. After all, despite one or two close calls, the Cold War never turned hot between the superpowers, and both sides, that is the US and Soviet Union, reached a relatively stable understanding regarding their respective spheres of influence. Indeed, the US and Soviet Union were highly pragmatic in fashioning institutions and accepting informal norms that underpin how they conducted the Cold War. Surely the US and China can do the same. Quite possibly, but the reality is that if we look for analogies, then we're probably at the 1950s phase of the Cold War rather than the post-1962 period, which saw both sides keen to forge crisis management norms and, in time, formal arms control. It's a sober thought that it might take a Cuban Missile Crisis moment to spur Beijing and Washington to embark on meaningful confidence-building measures. Even if the US and China go down this path, that is down the path of confidence-building measures and a sort of post-1962 relationship, it won't necessarily be good for everyone. Contrary to most of the Western literature, which mirrors a distinctly Atlanticist Eurocentric perspective, the Cold War was not peaceful. In Asia, it was an extremely violent experience that was characterized by proxy wars that prolonged and accentuated civil wars in Korea, Vietnam, and in other parts of Southeast Asia. It's entirely conceivable that in adapting to their Cold War, Beijing and Washington will engage in confrontation via proxies and push the costs of that confrontation onto third parties, what we used to refer to as the periphery or the third world in the international system. Ironically, we may once again experience an international order that avoids major war, but which is nevertheless riven by conflict resulting from superpower rivalry. In conclusion, what does all of this mean for the future of peaceful change in international relations? Well, I've only got 1 minute left, so I'll try and address this question in 1 minute. While, to quote Soren Kierkegaard, life can only really be understood backwards, there are almost certainly two key prerequisites for a peaceful transition in the US-China relationship. The first is the development of institutions that formalize CBMs, confidence building measures, and a structured dialogue over key areas of contention in the strategic realm, including nuclear weapons and, over time, artificial intelligence and other cutting-edge technologies. Secondly, accentuation and exploitation of key areas where the preferences and interests of both sides overlap. Climate change is the most salient of these, and given its planetary significance for all of us, may well be sufficient in forging closer cooperation between Beijing and Washington across their relationship more broadly. Kai, I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate not only summarize the key contribution of the three speakers, but also talk about the dynamics of US-China relations in the context of, international order transition, and also you propose, two solutions probably to help, the country to deal with these dynamics in the international order, and also how to contribute to the peaceful change. Thank you very much for all the inspiring and the insightful talks from our four speakers, and also insightful comments from Andrew. And before we start the Q&A and let the audience to ask a question, I would like to give opportunity to three speakers, TV, Debbie, and Debbie, and to respond to Andrew's comments, probably, about Andrew's proposal about peaceful change, and a big question about how to manage US-China competition during the period of order transition. May I suggest probably each speaker have 2 to 3 minutes to talk about your response to Andrew's comments. Can we start with Dewi? Yeah, I think I see Dewi's. Can we start with Dewi? Then
yeah, thank you very much. So what I like to underline what Andrew said, that the Cold War is never cold in Southeast Asia. Or in Asia, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, then the Cambodian conflict, and the interventions, in Indonesian politics, intervened by both sides, by the US, by China, and so on. So the difference is, Andrew talked about the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the US were able more or less to coexist in terms of having different spheres of influence, except where they overlap in the region. But between the US and China, the influence of both in the Indo-Pacific, particularly in North and Southeast Asia. The difference is that now that the third world countries have more agency. And I think that this is really this difference, that the more greater resilience, countries in Southeast Asia, individually and also through ASEAN, there's a greater regional resilience and the fight for strategic autonomy and centrality and so on. This is going to be tested, but there is a sea change in that. And I think so this is very, very important, that the G2 countries want to, in the Cold War, they want to either bring you into their side or at least deny you from the other side. But now, while some countries are probably bandwagoning, like the smaller countries in the mainland Southeast Asia, but there is still a choice. Give them more money, then they will be able to accept to play a more independent role. So in this sense, the role of smaller middle powers and regional institutions like ASEAN and ASEAN centrality, I think, is going to be quite critical in ensuring that the region does not again become a theater for proxy conflicts. And clearly, for us, this is not an academic issue. We are living with this, and we all have to deal with how to manage China and take advantage of what China has to offer, while mitigating negative impacts. And this is, part of the project that Kai is also doing, navigating this transition in international order. And for Indonesia, and mostly for all the other ASEAN countries, is hedging plus. So it's hedging and as well plus constructivism, having this middle power moment for strengthening regional autonomy as well as agency for ASEAN as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Dewi. It's very especially important for ASEAN and the middle power, play a positive role during the order transition. So Debbie, do you want to comment about China's rise for status and the competition with US?
Well, I don't think the Cold War is a very good analogy, because during the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union each had their spheres and they were completely separated from each other. And we didn't trade with the Soviet Union. And now it's very different. We're entangled with China. And so it's a lot more complicated than the Cold War. And in some respects, it's more difficult. Another difference is that the Soviet Union was never an equal in all aspects to the United States. It was always behind economically. It was always a backward state. And now in some respects, China believes that it's superior to the US, like in artificial intelligence and green technology. So I think maybe we need to rethink this and have new models. The Cold War doesn't really provide much guidance. I mean, we do need to have rules and norms like they had in the Cold War, but in some sense, it's going to be more difficult because China is more powerful and it can push back.
So how about the G2 plus?
What is the G2 plus?
Plus institution, plus the middle power, what I want to suggest, maybe, yeah, G2
right, maybe
plus
we need the middle powers as a mediator to keep the two sides from clashing.
Yeah, I think just suggest. TV, do you want to comment on?
Andrew's points are very well taken, and comments by my two panelists also made a lot of sense. But I think the differences we have to understand, war as an instrument of foreign policy has declined even for China, and definitely for any power that wants to emerge as powerful in the system. That was not the case during the industrial era when the European powers fought and tried to dominate the world. The nuclear context, the deep globalization, but none of this would preclude limited wars, extremely dangerous crises, and what new technologies will allow for the resurgence of what you call short war illusion. The Europeans before World War I, as you know, thought that they could somehow achieve war within a short period of time, their objectives, and that has been cut short by the nuclear revolution. But I don't know what the cyber will do. Will it allow a party to gain immediate advantage? If you start a short war, you can win without causing much bloodshed. These are all big issues. The second one is miscalculations. The short response time, if tomorrow China takes over Taiwan, will it give enough time to the United States to respond in a peaceful manner or even going to diplomacy? I think US policy right now is a fairly quick response. That is problematic. That's one of the problems with the mutual assured destruction paradigm. And the third point I would raise is, if I'm running the United States today, which I'm not, you have to think. Obviously, look at what happened to Britain. It won World War II, but within 10 years, it had to withdraw its naval forces from beyond the Suez. And so even if you win, victory has very little meaning. Of course, we don't know the other issues. The other thing is the absence of hard balancing coalitions today. Balance of power, as you know, I have written on soft balancing. And one thing is, balance of power somehow assumes it's preserving peace, but whenever the system has formed this extreme binary coalitions or even difficult coalitions, they have generated propensities for war initiation. I look at World War I, World War II, and Cold War is different, but clearly it was very focused conflict. I think the key thing is the political leadership in these countries, especially rising China, have to really think about it has achieved a lot in a short period of time, peacefully, and by benefiting from the global order that the globalization and the even the US-led order has provided. Now, to achieve superiority for what? For status, for some kind of civilizational goal? I mean, you know, it's very vague. What do you do with your superiority? I mean, you're already doing very well, you know, so coexistence, the Chinese foreign policy has that tradition too. Even during Mao's time, they talked about punch shield, remember? There are a lot of these traditions that needs to be looked into for China to thrive in this world, along with the others. There is no way to think about in this zero-sum context way. And Deng Xiaoping really tried to get out of that, but somehow they're going back to it, reading too much Mearsheimer, I believe. I think the problem is how to rise without a war. War and conflict will not produce all the things you want. So much suffering it will cause, and decline of states and disintegration of states. And the proxy war problem could resurrect. Of course, that's a graceful point right now, but what if you have China setting up a lot of these bases everywhere, and then Russia is another major part of this proxy war today. So the great powers have an interest. They are not talking partly because of ego problems, partly because of leaders, sort of languages. They need to have better understanding and appreciation of each other's status, desires, and not to humiliate each other, which is very important. I was just reading this Concert of Europe. The last point the concert leaders agreed was no great power will be humiliated. They neglected that in World War, after the Versailles settlement, neglected that and put Germany in such a bad situation. So this is very important. You know, the subject that Debbie Larson taught us, the political psychology needs to be brought in. What is causing this much irritation when leaders use language that make the others cringe and try to retaliate? You know, I think Mr. The Putin's problem is quite a bit that personal animosity. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, TV. Yeah, let's start our Q&A and take some questions from the audience. And I invite all the audience to raise questions. Please turn on your camera if you want. You can engage this kind of face-to-face dialogue with, okay, I see. Huiyun, you can turn on your camera and ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presenters and commentators. I have a policy first on the US policy. There is a lot of concerns about the US election cycles, that there will be Trump coming back or someone like that coming back. And how will the US sustain its credibility in the world, in the leadership role? And a question on the peace and peaceful change, also related to philosophy. That's as the foundation of our IR field. We refer to these philosophical thoughts and philosophical writings a lot, but it seemed to me that the basic root has changed for these philosophical thinking. So it might be that it's time to look to the East in looking for international relations philosophical root as well. The peaceful change, there's the Confucius argument on peace, especially in East Asia that Devi mentioned. So it might be that we look into these different philosophical roots into our IR field's theoretical building efforts. Another question is related to the Steven Pinker argument about the world change, human nature changed to less violence in general. So does it mean that our IR field way of looking at the state's preferences and people's general preferences should change as well? Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Any speaker want to answer the question?
Yes.
Okay, Debbie,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Debbie, yeah, please.
A quick answer to the question about Trump. Well, an easy answer would be that if Trump is reelected, the United States will not be liberal, and it won't be a leader either. But to be more serious, I think that the United States would still continue to be a leader. When you think back, there really isn't, in some respects, there isn't that much difference between Trump's foreign policy and Biden's foreign policy. The trade war, the tariffs that Trump imposed are still there. And the United States hasn't done that much concretely for climate change yet. I mean, hopefully there will be. And we still have strained relations with Russia. Maybe they will improve, but there's some elements of continuity between Trump and Biden. So in some respects, Trump wasn't that big of a aberration. Maybe it was more of his style and his infatuation with Putin, as made him seem different. But I guess the State Department and Congress sort of slowed down really substantive change, apart from the trade war.
Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, TV.
Let me briefly address. I mean, I also sympathize quite a bit Huan's argument about the philosophical route, whether it's time to look into the East. The problem is, I think the Eastern philosophies, even though there are a lot of peace in it, I can talk a little bit about Hindutva, Hindu ideology. There is also possibilities for violence, okay? This is a problem with Sinic world order too, as far as I see. And the use of those ideas by political elite, as we see a lot in India today, to propagate a certain version of that particular civilizational route. While propaganda-wise saying, this idea of Vishwa Kudumbam means a universal house, a lot of things that we hear are there in Upanishads and all these texts, but somehow when it comes to implementation, the actual behavior, does it consist, is it consistent with these traditions of peace? And what Gandhi did was brilliantly, that part of him, he pulled out some of the very peaceful ideas out of Hindu and Buddhist ideas, so ahimsa, that is non-violence. He realized that that has the potential, but it has to be couched in a way as a religious, civilization. Otherwise, the ordinary folk will not follow him. So this was the most brilliant use of civilization. But I haven't come across enough evidence to show that the adaptation of these civilization ideas that are happening in this era, sort of nationalism has taken over too. So the mixing of nationalism and civilizational idea, that is big challenge for Asian societies today. We have internal nationalism and external nationalism, and the states also want to get main role in the international system, where the established powers simply don't allow newcomers that easily, the Western dominated international system. So while I agree that we need to think about these it's time on these civilizations also to come up with ideas. As I just mentioned, Gandhi did, not that everything Gandhi did is correct or fantastic, but this part of strategy of pulling out. The Steven Pinker idea is fascinating. Why IR is fixated on the state-centric, even liberalism, despite its focus a little bit on domestic politics. It seems when it comes to interstate relations, somehow these people in charge also seem to behave at times like what the IR theorists worry about or think about. I do agree that we need to think about whether if there is a big transformation in human nature through education, socialization, etc., can that translate into state behavior? And you do see that change in many parts of the world, especially in the European context. But whether it is a global process, global change, it's something worth exploring. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Devi, do you want to add something? Yeah.
Yeah. If remember, Amitav Acharya and Barry Buzan actually produced a book on a more global international relations that look at different ideas. So I think that it is worth pursuing. But I, for one, I'm always a bit worried about relativism, because that was the argument used by the authoritarian leaders in Asia to say, we are different, our values, we emphasize community rights over individual rights, and that was for a long time, that was used. Disciplines are more important, peace is better, and it all ends up in tyranny. So and if you look at the birth of new states in South Asia, Western education is no longer Western, it's global. The ideas of nationalism itself, the idea of nation states, this is now a universal idea. So I would like to appropriate these ideas, not simply saying, this is alien ideas to us, because that could also lead to defensivism. This is not really our ideas. We have to develop our own system. So I'm in favor of universal values and look at ways of learning from each other. But while we in Asia are much more willing to learn about Western thinking, I think it is true that the Western side of it also need to do more appreciation to look also at studies about the region. And I'm a bit gung-ho despite the weaknesses of our regional efforts here. The fact of the matter is that, we have done fairly well in this peace in the region. It's good, and maybe this human nature is materialism. We can't get rich if there's conflict. That is, you can't enjoy our current lifestyle if we go to wars. The only people who will make money will be the agents of the military industries, and they're not us. They'll probably also be mostly Western European countries and the US and so on. So for us, Debbie's right in the sense, we are all trading. What we need at the moment is more engaging with China, but a fairer trade. So for China to be much more sensitive, to get out of its middle kingdom mentality. And that is what we find unacceptable. We all want to see a prosperous China, a China that is functioning well. China does not have a history of colonialism. That is, I think, what China has been proud of, and its engagement with the world has been more cultural and trading. So don't become a Western light power. Don't go into realist perspective. If China can return to its roots of giving us great civilizations without behaving like former imperialist powers in Western Europe, we will all welcome China.
Thank you very much. I like the idea, the mutual learning between different civilizations is not who is the dominant one. I think that's a great idea. The West and the East, they should learn from each other instead of, treat each other as a rival ideas, rival civilizations. That's fantastic. There's any question from the audience? If no, then I will ask some questions. Let me ask a very quick question to 4 speakers, because right now, I think that recently, Australia, UK, and the United States, they form a new military alliance called AUKUS. So my question is, what do you make of this new military alliance? Will this AUKUS necessary or redundant for the nuclear deterrence between US and China? Because I think Andrew mentioned the nuclear deterrence between those 2 countries seems okay, seems robust. So will this new military alliance escalate a security dilemma as well as trigger arms race in the region? Because I think Indonesian, Southeast Asian countries, some countries already show their concerns of this new military alliance in the region. So big questions, will this one contribute to the peaceful change of international order in Indo-Pacific? I see, Debbie, do you want to answer the question? How Indonesia's position about the AUKUS?
Well, Indonesia has never been a great supporter of military alliances. That's why we are non-aligned. That's how we navigate the world. And Indonesia has been one of the first to comment, not so much on the AUKUS, but more on the nuclear submarine deals, which Indonesia's concern. The three issues that has been raised, which has been clarified also by Scott Morrison, that the issues of what did it mean to Australia's commitment to NPT, because this is not just although it's not nuclear weaponized, the submarines, but what about the fissile materials and so on, because Australia is not does not have that kind of capability. And then about commitment to peaceful resolutions to conflicts. So because will this actually increases bellicosity rather than looking to promote dialogue and cooperation? And the thirdly, commitment to UNCLOS. Indonesia is an archipelagic state, and Australia is to the south. There's concerns about nuclear-powered submarines going, of course, into Indonesian waters and so on. And there's concerns about arms race, because a lot of countries, other US allies, might be jealous and want to develop this. And clearly that would lead to a counterbalancing by China, improving its anti-submarines and so on. So that there is a real concern, and President Joko Widodo, again, and in fact, he explicitly mentioned AUKUS, his concerns that this will not improve the spirit of dialogue and inclusive regional architecture that Indonesia and ASEAN are trying to promote.
Yes, thank you. Andrew, how about you? What do you make of this new military alliance?
That's a really tough question, Kai. Right at the end too. Look, I think AUKUS is a work in progress. There's an 18-month consultation period over how this will evolve, and there are two kind of elements. There's the nuclear-powered submarine dimension, the acquisition, which is yet to sort of play out how that will work, where the subs will be built, what the bridging capability will be for Australia when the current Collins class attack submarine phases out in the middle part of the 2030s, and these nuclear subs won't be ready by then. So is it a case of Australia leasing UK or US subs to sort of tide us over until we get the new gen system? The second issue is, and I think this is often overlooked actually, is that this agreement is designed to sort of reinforce Australia's relations in the military tech space with the US, and particularly getting access to the US defence industrial base, and not just in the nuclear dimension either, but in areas like AI and others. And this has been a sore point for Australia for some time in the alliances, that although we play with the Americans in a range of areas, they don't actually give us an entree into the US defence industrial base. And so I think that's the big selling point for the Australian government. The other thing I would say is about how this has been managed by Australia in the region. I think Australia's management of this has left a lot to be desired, to be honest. And I think the key there is clarifying what this means. It doesn't mean Australia is going to acquire nuclear weapons. I've seen some sort of wild speculation about that. But it's also being aware that there's a degree of sensitivity in the region, including, I would say, particularly in Indonesia, about how Australia plays in the nuclear space. And you can trace this back to the 1960s, actually, when the Gorton government was looking at a threshold nuclear capability. And frankly, that was directed at Indonesia. So I think the current governments need to be aware of that historical legacy they've inherited and address that and message that accordingly in the way Australia sells this in the region. And so far, I think that's left a bit to be desired.
Thank you. Debbie, do you want to talk a little bit from the US perspective, this new military alliance?
Hi, well, it's a good example of how the United States relative power is declining in East Asia. China has built up its navy so that it has a bigger navy than the United States does. And the United States can't really maintain its hegemony the way they used to. So this is really a creative way for the United States to enlist its allies to do more. And it's a form of status accommodation that the United States is giving Australia more status, by giving them access to the US defense base as sort of an incentive for them to share more of the burden. So from the standpoint of the United States, it's not really an arms race, it's a balancing of China's growing power. It's not like China has just been sitting still over the past 10 years. They have really built up their navy, including their submarines. And we really need another power to assist in the submarines in the region.
Thank you.
So I think there are already pre-existing alliances between ANZUS, and I think Britain and Australia have traditional alliance relationship. So I do not see this is going to lead to a new race for alliance formation as happened in the Cold War. Who is going to join this alliance? Potentially India, but I think India is also like Indonesia, very, very reluctant to get into, unless of course the border tensions increase and China war with China is inevitable. I mean, India has done that in the past with the Soviet Union. So I see a lot of it is the ball is on China's court. The past 5-6 years have seen China pushing too hard on these middle powers, including Indonesia. Not Indonesia, including Australia. I don't know what China has gained from it. Nobody has gone really afraid of China. And today's New York Times has this interesting article, Australia is actually diversifying its trade from China. So obviously, this is a reactive mode. But this region, by the way, had alliances like this, Seato and CENTO all survived for 10 years, declined. So I think it will all depend on how the threat inflation will happen in the region, whether China will ratchet it up. I mean, whether Taiwan will be taken over. I mean, a lot of things can happen. The India-China border tensions, will it escalate? So alignment is going to be a function of this threat perception. This is very important to realize, and countries have to tame their tendency to escalate.
Okay, thank you very much. It's already time to conclude today's roundtable discussion. On behalf of Griffith's Center for Governance and Public Policy, I would like to thank again to our 4 distinguished speakers today for their great contribution to today's discussion on this important topic, peaceful change. In the future, could be a very important research program, new research program in the IR discipline. Many thanks to our audience from actually all over the world to attend today's event. Please, I would like also appreciate your continued support for our center as well as for the global research network on peaceful change in the future. And thank you again, and enjoy your day. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.